Gang, let's go ahead and get started. We'll call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is approval of the minutes.
April 17th, 2019, 24 current and new members present, as well as guest speaker. Vice President Melvin Freelix called the meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. and all stood for the pledge. Approval of minutes. Secretary Susie Johnson read the minutes from March 13th. Motion to approve by Bill Kramer, second by Linda Wagner. All in favor, motion passes. Treasurer report. Treasurer Lisa Sundblad reported $555 in deposits, expenditures of $500 for scholarships, and $140 for advertising, with a current balance of $4408.39. Motion to approve by Per Thomas, second by Judy Thomas. All in favor, motion passes. Guest speaker was Nancy Rice, Executive Director of Better Together. She spoke on the proposed St. Louis City-County merger. She took several questions from the group. County office holders report. Linda Wagner mentioned lots of new construction throughout the county, but some without permits. Wayne Williams talked about some changes in the prosecuting attorney's office, particularly with new technology and the dissolving of the fine collection center. Sarah Hogue mentioned she is currently working with auditors. Susie spoke for Julie Bova, mentioning the FCC transition as well as the circuit court taking over City of St. Mary and City of St. Genevieve municipal tickets. There were no committee reports. Members were reminded that scholarship applications are due May 10th. Melvin asked for 2 volunteers to read scholarship apps before entering into a drawing, and Gina Bryant and Steve Pinkley volunteered. No Democratic news or updates at that time. Our next speaker, at the time we thought it was John Payne, but now it's Corinne Chester, board member, MoCan Trade, and he was the co-founder of Amendment 2 Consultants. She'll give us the update when she speaks, I'm sure. We're still looking for a June and July speaker. 50-50 drawing was for $33.50. Courtney Goodwin won and donated the winnings back, and Carl Kinski won the attendance prize. With no further business to discuss, Melvin asked for a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Per, seconded by Bill. All in favor, meeting adjourned at 8:16 p.m.
Any amendments or changes? Anyone would like to make a motion to accept the minutes? Motion. Bill made a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Kathy Waltz. I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Treasurer report.
Treasurer's report. We started this month with $408.39. We received $177 in receipts, including $67 from the 50-50 at last month's meeting and 11 dues. Most of those were received through the mail, finishing the month with $4,585.39.
Thank you. All right. So our guest speaker for this evening, I did want to reiterate, so there was a question earlier in the day. When we agreed to, back in January, agreed to try to have a speaker on a current topic each month, we also agreed to open that up to the public so that anyone could attend. So, and I just want to let everyone know that the meeting is open to the public, particularly the speaker, so that we can get more folks to come in, hear our speaker. All right? Yes, ma'am.
Whenever we have the August speaker, the Medicare for All doctor come, can we do it at the community center? If we can get that okay out there?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. Is there a fee?
I don't know, I haven't checked into it yet.
Okay. I'm not opposed to that, but we have 2 more months to discuss it.
Right.
I'm not opposed to the meeting. Okay. Let's move on. So we have Corinne Chester here this evening. She is the Vice President of MoCan Trade and also the Outreach Coordinator for New Approach, Missouri. And we welcome her to St. Genevieve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Corinne Chester. I live in Hillsboro in Jefferson County. John Payne was the campaign manager for New Approach, Missouri, and he actually had surgery last week for a hernia, so he asked me to come and talk to you guys. I'm the vice president of MoCan Trade, which is Missouri Medical Cannabis Trade Association, and I'm the outreach coordinator for New Approach, Missouri, which is the campaign that worked on Amendment 2 that passed in November. I'm also a patient, so I started working on the campaign in 2016. I have osteodegenerative and a genetic form of rheumatoid arthritis. I was diagnosed when I was in my 30s. They were very hesitant to give me a diagnosis because I was so young and because RA is not something that you normally see in somebody in their lower 30s. I'm 49. I just turned 49 in April. So I've had it for a while. I've been on all the different medications that you can think of. And when I started working on the campaign 3 years ago, I was taking about 46 pills a day on average that were pharmaceuticals, all pharmaceuticals. So I take a lot of supplements now. I still have one medication that I take twice a day, but I use oil. It's not a getting high thing. It is a CBD oil and then a 1-to-1 ratio oil that puts me in complete remission. So I don't currently have access to all of those things that will put me in remission and keep me there. But hopefully next year I will because we passed the amendment in November. So I just wanted you to understand where I'm coming from. I'm not just one of the trade association people. I'm also a patient. So Amendment 2, we tried to get Amendment 2 on the ballot in 2016, and we very narrowly missed making the ballot, but we regrouped fairly quickly and we collected signatures and made the 2018 ballot. We really expected to have a battle at the end after the vote because there were 3 medical marijuana measures on the ballot, which was unprecedented in the history of marijuana law reform anywhere in the country. So we had 2 constitutional amendments and then Prop C. And we expected to have to go to litigation with Brad Bradshaw after the election was over, but we won by a huge margin. Our yes on 2, no on 3 campaign worked, and we won with 66% of the vote. St. Genevieve County came in with 60% approval. So that kind of showed a lot of people were really worried about some of the rural areas, but people in rural areas have chronic pain too. I grew up in a small community in Texas and had, so I knew that people would probably be more open-minded to it than some of the campaign people thought. And I live in a small community not very far from here. So anyway, so now that we have Amendment 2, there are a lot of ways that this will now turn around and we'll start to see benefits from it after we have dispensaries open and patients are going to be able to get cards. So the rules and regulations, the license application process, and all of that will be released by the Department of Health and Senior Services on June 4th. And then applications for businesses for cultivation, extraction, and infusion and dispensary operations will be due between August 3rd and August 17th. So let's see. There will be 60 cultivation, 86 extraction, and about 192 dispensary licenses. The amendment calls for 2 laboratory licenses, but DHSS is saying that they will license quite a few more laboratories just so that we can make sure that testing is kept up with. 2 labs would not be enough with 60 cultivation facilities. But all of the numbers are minimums, not maximums. So as the population of Missouri grows, then they could potentially add more dispensary licenses, more cultivation licenses, and that sort of thing. But DHS has said that outside of the laboratory licenses, they will issue the minimums only when they issue in December. So licenses will be awarded in December. We have encouraged DHSS to potentially issue the cultivation licenses first. That would make sense because then there's growing season and all of that. So after plants are growing, it'll still probably be towards the middle of next year before dispensaries are up and open. There's been so much change in just the way that all of these laws are handled there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity about CBD, for example. If it's derived from industrial hemp, it's regulated completely differently than it is if it's derived from cannabis. So marijuana, one of the things that it is also very good at helping with is people who have to use opioids for chronic pain. One of the major benefits of cannabis is that it is not possible to die from an overdose of cannabis. You can consume every amount of cannabis on the planet, and it will make you wish you hadn't, and you will be miserably sick, but it will not kill you. You will wish that it would kill you probably, but it will make you throw up and give you a headache. It won't kill you. One of the major problems with opioids is that the therapeutic dose that's required to treat pain is also very close to the same amount that will kill you. And so when you get that close to that threshold, it's always dangerous. My mom is an amputee. Her doctor gave her a Narcan prescription a couple weeks ago. That scares me a lot. So I know a lot of people who've lost loved ones from opioids. It is one of the biggest crises that our country faces. I grew up in the 80s when Ronald Reagan got up in front of the country and said that marijuana was the most dangerous threat facing American youth. And I think about that now and just how we were all so scared of it. And it just it kind of worries me because a lot of people base their opinion about cannabis, whether it's medical or adult use, they base their opinion of cannabis on the rhetoric that they've heard, during the Just Say No and the war on drugs. So there has been a lot of misconception about cannabis being a gateway drug, but it's actually now being used as an exit drug. People who use cannabis in states where cannabis is medically legal, Medicare spending goes down, opioid deaths and overdoses go down, and I have a bunch of statistics here that somebody put together for me so I could tell you. There is a really great doctor, her name is Dr. Addie Wilson-Poe, and she's done some research on using cannabis and opioids in combination, and she found that if you use cannabis with your opioids, you can use half as much of the opioids but maintain the effectiveness, which drops your potential for dying from an overdose by a whole lot. So, and there's also, so the Journal of American Medicine in 2014 said that states with medical marijuana laws have 25% fewer opioid-related overdoses, but they know that that number goes up the longer that medical marijuana is legal in a state. That rate, the death overdose goes down, and Medicare spending goes down. And then, so let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that that cannabis and the legalization will impact the economy, because that's pretty important. It's very likely, St. Genevieve is part of Congressional District 8, so the amendment requires, I think, 16 dispensaries per congressional district. So that means that Congressional District 8 will have 16 dispensaries, and so will the city of St. Louis. So Congressional District 1 is the city of St. Louis. Geographically, it's tiny. This is one of the things I think that they'll find maybe in a year or two is that they do want to issue more dispensary licenses for communities that are in the congressional districts that are so big, mostly 6 and 8. So, so legal cannabis sales have increased like 34% since 2018, which is now they're saying $10.8 billion. There have been a couple of studies that have come out recently about what the patient base and all that will be in Missouri, and there was one that came out not very long ago that was a really super conservative estimate that was a lot different than a lot of the statistics we had been putting together before. We were estimating about 100,000 people, between 1 and 200,000 people by the end of year 3. So if we have, you know, the 60 cultivation, 86 extraction, and 192 dispensaries, that is also going to bring a lot of jobs. Dispensaries need staff, retail employment, and jobs in the cannabis industry tend to pay higher than other industries. Let's see, according to a recent study by a company called Glassdoor, the median paycheck in the cannabis industry is about 11% higher than the U.S. median salary of $52,863. So one of the reasons that I was actually interested in the cannabis industry a few years ago when I first started kind of doing research was that it said that there was more opportunity in the cannabis industry for women than there are in other industries, that industry just seemed to be kind of more open-minded to the possibilities, and that had expanded a lot faster in the cannabis industry. And I will say that I would agree with that. What I do in the space now is I produce educational events and trade shows. So I just produced a trade show. My company is called Midwest Canna Expos. So we just had a trade show at Union Station in March. And there is a huge amount of interest from all over the country about how we are implementing this program in Missouri, partially because Missouri was, a lot of people in the country said Missouri will be last, you know, because it's such a conservative state. And the Missouri legislature is the legislature in the United States most likely to overturn the will of the people. They've done it on numerous occasions. We vote, they don't care. But for some reason, they really decided that with the medical marijuana issue that they were going to listen to what the people had to say, and that they've been very positive as far as like how they've handled implementation. They've been really open to input. They've listened to everything people have had to say. And they've said that they want this to be an example of how successful an implementation can be. So that's good news, because this is what the people wanted. 66% of the population, of the voting population voted for this. So in Oklahoma, it just passed medical, and they've already had over 2,000 new jobs created. So just the presence of the implementation of the program will show that there will be a lot of jobs created in Missouri. There are over 200,000 cannabis jobs in the United States. Over 60,000 of those were added in 2018. So this industry is just continuing to grow and grow and grow. And Missouri is also, because we're kind of we're in the middle of the country. Now that Missouri has passed, there are a lot of people in the broader industry that really feel like that's kind of a sign that, that people will be more open-minded to it. So I would be happy to take questions if anybody has questions. I can pretty much answer questions about industry or the amendment or implementation or anything. So.
The number of licenses can go up. Is it by population? Is it tied to population?
Yes.
Or can it be tied to demand?
No, it's tied to population. So for cultivation, they are going to issue one license for every 100,000 residents. 6 million people, when they did the census and did the calculations, means 60 licenses. If the population goes up, they can issue more licenses, but they can never retract licenses. If they issue 3 more, they can't go back in a year and go, we've decided to have 60 cultivation licenses.
But they can go above them.
They can go above the minimum, and actually, quite a few people have, including myself, suggested that they consider issuing more dispensary licenses in outlying areas in Congressional District 6 and 8 specifically, but they are only going to issue the minimums. They can go back at any time though and amend that, and what I hope to see is that they'll issue the minimum licenses that will allow these businesses to get up and running, and then they'll realize, you know, that implementation is mostly finished, but there are some needs in some areas and they'll expand.
So that would take an amendment?
No, the DHSS can issue additional licenses without having to go through that. Anything else? Yes.
So all of your talk about the production and everything, will all the marijuana sold in the state be produced in the state? Or can
Yes.
it come in
No.
from other places? Or
Because-
can businesses come in from other places instead of?
Because it's federally illegal, there's no transport over state lines, so everything that's a gummy or a you know, they buy flour, they buy gummies or chocolate or an edible, it has to be made with cannabis that was grown and extracted and handled in Missouri. There are companies that are interested in, you know, working with operators in Missouri. Licenses have to be issued to greater than 50%. If it's a corporation that has multiple partners, over 50% ownership has to be Missouri-based.
So does it require a prescription by a medical doctor, or what happens?
It's a certification. So a patient goes to a doctor, and all the doctor is doing is certifying that they have a qualifying condition. So the qualifying conditions in Amendment 2 are really inclusive and broad. Chronic pain, epilepsy, but there's also a couple of catch-all phrases, so doctors can issue for a condition because they think medical cannabis could help it. So this covers, there's so many things that we learn every day about that cannabis can help. And if it's a condition that's not specifically listed, a doctor can still certify for it, but all they're doing is saying that that person has a qualifying condition.
So who controls individual dosages based on the particular problem that the
So when
patient
you
has?
go into a dispensary to buy product, they will have patient care people who can talk to you about what products they have, what products are good for different things. For example, if you use an edible or a gummy or something like that for me, for RA, an edible or a gummy will help me systemically. If I smoke, it will help with my pain right away, but it doesn't put me in remission. What puts me in remission is when I use an oil or an edible that's decarboxylated by my liver. So one of the things that most people don't realize about cannabis is that hemp and cannabis are actually exactly the same plant. Hemp is classified as hemp because it has a less than 0.03% THC rate. Hemp grows on every inhabited piece of land on the planet, every single one. Hemp was a huge part of the food chain for millions and millions of years. Animals ate hemp, we ate animals. We had cannabinoids and CBD and all that in our diet. So your body has a system called the endocannabinoid system. The only job your endocannabinoid system has is to process the ingredients that come from hemp and cannabis, things that aren't found in huge abundance pretty much anywhere else. CBD can also be extracted from hops, so it does occur in other places, but not in a great quantity. So your body has this system, and what cannabinoids do, what CBD specifically does, is it helps your body achieve balance. So autoimmune disease, most RA is autoimmune disease that's not genetic. So your immune system is attacking your joints like they're a foreign body. So people can actually suffer from autoimmune disease like fibromyalgia, Crohn's disease, from trauma. So from emotional trauma, if you have a severely traumatic experience, it can trigger autoimmune disease. What cannabinoids do is help your body recover from trauma and create homeostasis in your body. Our bodies actually need cannabinoids. just the same way you take a vitamin D supplement or a vitamin C supplement because you don't get enough in your diet. We have an entire system in our body made to process cannabinoids, but we have no cannabinoids in our diet. So prior to 1937, when Prohibition really took hold in the United States, we didn't have the prolific Alzheimer's and dementia and MS and Parkinson's and a lot of illnesses that they're now saying that cannabis is a miracle for it. It's not really that it's a miracle cure. It's that the condition is caused by a deficiency to begin with. So it is science. So one of the great things about doing all this work for all these years is the whole time I've been like, science is on our side. We can do this. Science is on our side, you know. But a lot of people heard the same things I did about cannabis being the most dangerous thing on the planet and that it was the greatest threat facing our American youth. So what we know to be true now is actually the opposite of what we were told about marijuana in the 80s. Yes.
My understanding, which could be flat wrong, is that because it remains illegal at the federal level, that the transactions are all going to have to be cash-based.
Banking is a huge, huge problem in the industry, and a lot of dispensaries especially cannot get a bank to handle their money. They can't get credit card processing, and they have to deal with cash transactions. A lot of them, like in legal states in Colorado, if you go into a dispensary, they'll have an ATM there, but you have to pay cash. I'm an event planner. I do trade shows, and I have a hard time finding anybody to process credit card transactions.
So, I mean, employees of like a dispensary, will they be paid in cash? Or will
I
they-
know that that does happen, but there are actually a couple of banks in Missouri that are stepping up and saying that they are willing to work with companies that are involved in cannabis. That solves the cash problem with being able to, you know, having to handle large amounts of cash. They still won't be able to process credit cards, but they have a place to put their cash and they don't have to dig a hole in the basement. I mean, that happens. In Colorado and California, these dispensaries have to deal with cash. So they have to handle transporting the cash. They have to pay their taxes. Even though it's illegal, they still have to pay taxes on all of it. They have to go pay their taxes in cash. They have to drive money to the federal treasury to pay their taxes. Yeah, it's a huge problem. But there are lobbying groups that are working in DC on the banking issues, and I really think that by the end of this calendar year that the federal government will do something to make it a little bit easier for banking, if not very shortly after the first of the year. I think we kind of reached a tipping point, and the federal government is going to have to do something about it. And just a heads up, somebody told me that Trump is going to legalize federal so that he can get reelected.
And then
I mean, that may be the only thing he could do to garner support at this point, but just wanted you to know that.
just kind of a follow-up.
I'm
Is
sorry?
it difficult to get a loan if you're going to set up a dispensary? Can you get
It's
a bank loan?
impossible, it's impossible to get a loan through traditional means. You
But it's
have to
really
find
easy
a
to
private
find
investor or work with, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's impossible. You can't even hardly get banks to open a bank account for you, much less give you a loan, so, yeah.
I have a friend that started taking CBD oil from him, and she said it was a miracle for her because she was in terrible chronic pain, and she had been to the doctor, and they tried everything, and they could not help her. So she calls it a miracle. The CBD oil helped her. Where can a person go now to get help that's in chronic pain with good advice on what kind of oil to take and how to manage that?
So CBD you can get at health food stores. You just want to be careful that you buy CBD that's been tested and that it's actually CBD. So if it is actually CBD, then somewhere on the label it'll say phytocannabinoid, cannabidiol, and it will tell you how much is in each it's a serving, not a dose. Because the FDA, who says that aspartame is safe and cannabis is dangerous, also says that if we give doses, then it's medicine, so we have to, it's classified as serving. So it'll tell you how many milligrams of CBD are in each serving. If it says hemp oil and it's derived from hemp seeds, it has no CBD in it at all.
Okay.
So it's important to make sure you get it from a good source.
So cannabidiol and what else was the other?
Phytocannabinoid, it'll tell you that it should say that it has CBD in it, and if you're going to a reputable place, they should be able to show you test results that came with their badge.
I heard there's a dispensary in Farmington, somebody told me.
There's a place in Farmington, Sweetleaf.
Sweetleaf?
Yes, Sweetleaf in Farmington they do carry CBD oil. They were a permanent signing, they did signs for us during the campaign. I drove signs down there and the guy distributed signs. He has CBD oil. There's also, I have a friend who has a CBD store called Blue Key CBD, and they're online.
What is it?
And it's called Blue Key CBD.
Spell
And
it.
she has a health food store in Fenton called The Natural Way. And when I started working with her, after we finished collecting signatures in 2018, and we were done with that, I worked at her store for a few months until the election. I took some of her CBD and sent it off to be tested myself because I didn't want to sell it to somebody and tell them, this doesn't have THC in it, you're not going to, because if you're a truck driver and you test positive for THC, you don't drive for 2 years, so.
What's that website again?
Blue Key CBD is the name
Blue
of the.
Key, K-E-Y?
Mm-hmm. I don't have any cards or anything,
Blue Key
but Blue
CBD?
Key, yep.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The
Okay.
first is the patient care people.
Mhm.
Are they licensed? What kind of education do they have?
So the state is not going to require a certification, but the people that I know that are working on dispensaries are going to require education anyway. A lot of the people that I know that are working on dispensary licenses come from healthcare. They want to help patients. That is their primary goal. And so there are companies and educational companies like Amsterdam University that offers the patient care specialist training and that sort of thing. They need to be educated on different strains of cannabis. So there are different strains of cannabis that have different effects. All cannabis has a level of THC or CBD, but there are also chemicals called terpenes that occur in cannabis. Limonene is one. It's the same thing in lemons that makes it smell lemony. There are different terpenes that have different effects, and some of them can help with pain and inflammation. Some of them can help. So some of them can help with appetite. So if you're on a medication that makes you nauseous, there are some strains of cannabis that you can use that will help you with nausea. I prefer things that don't give me the munchies. I don't like to have that problem. So there are different places where you can go and read about strains. There are apps, websites. Leafly is one of them.
Yeah, can they, or will they at the state level? I don't know, my yoga instructors have suggested things for my different kind of oils for my arthritis. But the caveat is always, well, make sure you get it from a good site, a safe site. So first of all, how do we identify these good sites? Secondly, is there any entity, you said you tested, you had something you were selling, tested yourself. Well, it's not going to do any good if the lab, who's testing it? And it's not legal, so who are the regulators making sure that what we are paying for is a safe drug that has the proportions of everything it should have?
So the labs will be a completely separate third party that will test the cannabis. So if I'm growing cannabis, for example, if I have a dispensary or a cultivation facility or an extraction facility and I have to make sure my cannabis is tested, I might test it myself just because I want to know, but I have to send it to a third party that's not associated with my business, that doesn't have a stake in whether or not I sell it, and they do third-party testing. Those guys are going to be regulated by the Department of Health and Senior Services. They'll be subject to inspections. They'll have to be able to provide records of testing and show that if they need to check that a dispensary has a lab test, they need to be able to go to that lab and find the same exact paperwork at the lab. So that will be regulated by DHS.
And that's Missouri's
Mhm.
department?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's the future, not the.
That's the
products that are out
future.
there right now.
Right, for right now, products, if it's not in a licensed dispensary, then there's no way, then it's not regulated. You need to, if you're buying it now, like if you're buying CBD now, you want to make sure you're getting it from a source that you've investigated. Yes.
I know there were several things that were voted on, and I saw that. Did this approve home growth for people? I can't remember.
This gives a very small home grow for patients. They can grow up to 6 flowering plants. So this will enable people to actually have medicine before the dispensaries are open, so they won't have to wait.
And that's anybody.
You have to apply for a card through the state. It costs an extra $100, and you're subject to all kinds of rules and compliance regulations and inspections, and that way they can make sure that people aren't growing it and dumping it into the black market.
And make sure that all these other people make money off of it instead of that person just personally, directing their own life.
Well, I mean, I guess if you have a preference as to who profits from it, whether it's the guy who has $1 million to open a dispensary or a guy who's growing it in his basement, but you won't, I mean, they'll have to have seed to sell, they'll have to have tracking of their seeds and everything. There's a caregiver provision, so you can have, a caregiver can grow plants for up to 3 patients. So for example, if I wanted to have plants that were mine that I had control over, like what nutrients they used and if they had chemicals or whatever, then, but I'm too busy because I work like 18 hours a day. I could hire somebody to be my caregiver and they could grow plants on my behalf. Again, it has to be in a secure location, it has to be inspected, all of that will be regulated. So they'll be subject to a surprise inspection. DHSS can show up anytime and check out their facility. Yes, ma'am.
Who's going to enforce all this?
DHSS is, they are hiring inspectors and training them on what to look for and writing all of the regulations. DHSS will run the whole thing. Now, they could potentially ask for help from other agencies in the government, but to my knowledge, they're not going to do that. At this point, that could change. So. Yes, ma'am.
Without getting too personal, you're fairly young. You said you were, I think, on 46 pills at one point. So going from all those pills to this oil, how much has that saved you each month? And how much has it helped you feel better compared to the pills?
When I started working on the campaign in 2016, I was on methotrexate, which is low-dose chemotherapy. My hair was coming out. I had to carry barf bags with me everywhere. I couldn't go to the grocery store without getting motion sick just from watching stuff go by on the aisle. When I went out to collect signatures, I could only go for an hour or 2 at a time, and I had to have somebody with me because I was sick all the time. I felt horrible all the time. And I decided after the 2016 campaign, when we went into litigation, I went into kind of spontaneous remission. I had been in constant pain for almost 4 years, like every moment of every day. And they called me and asked me to come in and help with litigation. And I woke up that morning, it was the Tuesday morning after Labor Day, and I didn't have pain for the first time in like 4 years. And we got done with litigation and it kind of came back. I always thought that maybe like somewhere inside, I knew they needed my help, so somewhere inside I like rose to the occasion. I can't explain how that happened. But when it came back, somebody had told me that a 1-to-1 oil could put me on commission. So I got in my car and went to Colorado. I was desperate. I mean, I had no eyebrows and my hair was coming out and it was terrible. But I'm still working on, I just got off diclofenac about 4 months ago. That's an anti-inflammatory that you're not supposed to take for longer than a few weeks because it can cause heart damage, and I was on it for 5 years. So, yeah, when I started, so for me, I mean, I can't say I would be dead without it, But my quality of, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you, for sure. I wouldn't have a business, I wouldn't have the life that I have now. It gave me my life back. I literally spent like 16 hours a day in bed because I was in pain all the time. So, yeah, so for me, it's super, super personal, yes.
How many pills do you take a day?
I take now,
No, in the beginning.
46 pills a day.
How many doctors prescribed them to you?
2.
And a pharmacist didn't question any of that?
Oh, no, they had me on, for RA, they had me on huge, huge doses of antidepressants. Cymbalta was one of them. They give it to you in low doses for depression, but when you have autoimmune disease, it helps with pain. So that was the one that made me motion sick all the time. I took 4 of those every day.
So were they testing your blood all the time? Your liver and all
I
that? or
went
not?
and got, there were periods of time when I was on medication where I would have to go every 2 weeks and have blood drawn so they could check my levels. Yeah.
And I guess some was legitimate doctors you were going to?
Yes, like I didn't go to a pain management doctor. I have a rheumatologist that I see, and I have my regular doctor that I go to if I don't feel good and I call the doctor. But I would estimate, you asked me about how much money, about prescriptions and stuff. I used to spend about $700 a month on prescriptions for my arthritis and pain. That's not included, I'm diabetic also, but that doesn't include that. But when I take CBD, I need less insulin. So I even use less insulin now than I used to. So it's a significant savings.
How do your doctors feel about the course you take?
My rheumatologist, when I first started talking to her about it in 2016, and I asked her if she had heard about using medical cannabis, she asked me if I was worried about being addicted to it. And I told her I wasn't any more worried about being addicted to cannabis than I was the Darvocet, the Percocet, the Oxy, or the cyclobenzaprine, or any of the other stuff. So, but after that, she kind of started reading about it, and she, now we have different conversations about it. And there are some doctors that will not write a certification. They won't do it, don't bother asking them. If they're tied into one of the hospital healthcare systems, a lot of times they won't do it. It affects their malpractice insurance, it affects their ability to get certified to work at specific hospitals. And, but some of the healthcare systems are talking to, they've talked to people from the Trade Association and from New Approach Missouri about trying to relax some of that so we can get more doctors on board. And we're working on some educational events also so we can help educate doctors. So yes.
Yeah, that was my question. How easy, if you want medical marijuana, how easy is it going to be for somebody to get it? Because I think something that people don't realize is that if you get money from the federal government, you could lose your benefits. So like housing, low-income housing, Section 8 housing, if you do it, you could lose your home.
So there are some things, like if you have a cannabis conviction for possession, even like a little tiny bit, you can no longer get student loans, you can no longer get housing, Section 8 and all that. There are some bills that have been put before the House to help protect people who are on food stamps and that kind of thing. But a lot of that is going to be, those situations are always like, this is the worst case scenario. You cannot get a student loan, you can get kicked out of your house, you can, but I don't, and I'm not saying that that never happens. It's really going to largely depend on where you live and how that locality feels about it. I mean, if you live in the city, it's going to be, in the city, cannabis is treated a lot differently than it is in Hillsborough, I can promise you that, so part of it's going to depend on that. A lot of this is really only going to be fixed when it's federally legal. That's the solution, is to get it off of the schedule. It's a Schedule I controlled substance. That affects the ability for people to get a bank account, get a student loan, get Section 8 housing. If you are a dispensary, for example, if I have a clothing store, I can deduct a lot of my overhead and all that as business expenses so that I have to pay less taxes. You can't do that with cannabis. If you're a dispensary, you can't write off your overhead because it is a Schedule I controlled substance. Back in the 90s, one of the guys from one of the cartels did his taxes and wrote off all his overhead for selling drugs. So the answer was the IRS came back and wrote 280E, which says that if you are trafficking in a Schedule I controlled substance, you cannot deduct your expenses from your taxes. So, yes.
What about at the state level, for state income tax?
It's state legal, so they're not gonna have a problem with it. It's been legalized at a state level, so it shouldn't affect that at all.
So it's run direct cash.
Yeah, except for that anything that is sold in a dispensary will have to run through a point of sale system that's tied into a system that's run out of the state, out of Jefferson City. So they've contracted with a company called Metric to be the state's seed-to-sale tracking system. So dispensaries will have to have systems that tie into that state. Either they'll use Metric or they'll use a point of sale service provider that ties in with Metric. So every time they make a sale, it may be cash and not traceable with a credit card or VAT, but they have to, every single thing will have a tag on it from the second it's a seed until it goes onto the shelf, and it will be tracked. So they'll track those transactions on the point of sale system against what their inventory is.
The employees get in cash.
So they'll still have to run all of that through a payroll system, like through QuickBooks or however they do it, but the state will be looking at that. All of these businesses will be required to operate completely above board, to be subject to inspection.
Is there a limit on the amount of plants a cultivating facility?
Yes. Yes, so 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy, I believe, is what the amendment reads. And then they're coming out with all of the regulations that weren't specified in the amendment now is what they're working on. It'll be out on June 4th. But the provision in the amendment is 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy, and then they're narrowing that scope a little bit more in the regulations. Any other questions?
Okay, go with a couple more questions.
Okay, yes.
You had mentioned testing, and laboratories and testing.
Yes.
I guess I missed part of that. What are they testing for?
So they will test for the level of THC, the level of CBD, they'll have terpene profiles. They'll be required to test for pesticides and any kind of contaminant like mold, mildew, stuff like that. So to make sure it's clean, it's not contaminated with anything, and how much THC and CBD it is.
So when you go into a dispensary, all that information is going to be on each product?
Yes, there are very strict labeling requirements. I don't think that they have to, I'm not sure if they have to give you all of the test results on the label or if they just have to make those available for you to look at.
My question was the level of THC.
Yes, that will have to, they will definitely have to tell you how much. So like an edible or a gummy, when you buy that, you'll know that it has this many milligrams per square or per gummy or whatever. So it'll say exactly what's in it.
How would a person know? I get a card, I go into the dispensary, how do I know how much?
So that's where the patient care specialists come in. The people will have to know what the different strains are, what they're good for, what products are better for different kinds of illnesses, and so that the dispensaries will have to have staff that can figure those
And the
things out.
dispensary, I'm sorry, we didn't take out the question, but the dispensary is one-on-one, right? It's not like your normal pharmacy, you walk in and shop.
Well,
You have to
no,
be
so
delegated.
you'll have to come in, you'll have to show ID, you'll have to show your card, you'll have to be entered into the database. This all takes place in a room that's completely separate from product. Then you'll have to go through a locked door into the room where there's product, where patient care specialists will help you choose what products you need. So, yeah, yes.
You mentioned Alzheimer's. Are there any studies being done, or will there be done with regard to?
So there have been some studies on Alzheimer's done in Israel that show that THC specifically causes, there is a plaque that forms in your brain that causes Alzheimer's. It's a protein. THC has been shown to dissolve that protein.
Isn't it true that the United States research stopped whenever they put marijuana on the drug schedule?
So most of the research has been done in other countries and is not FDA approved research. If you go to PubMed.gov, there are some studies, but there are parameters on FDA approved studies, or that the product has to come from University of Mississippi, is the only facility in the United States that's licensed to grow cannabis by the U.S. government. And the U.S. government actually still distributes cannabis cigarettes to 2 people who sued the government over glaucoma. And the federal government actually holds patents on cannabis as treatment for cancer and autoimmune disease.
Is there a way that we can reach out if we have more
Yes.
questions? Or?
Yes, definitely. I have some business cards, and I have a couple of handouts. I didn't know how many people were going to be here, but this is an op-ed that John Payne wrote. So I brought some copies of that, and then this is county regulation guidance. I made a few copies of that. Association.
And
So I'll
if they
just
wanna
leave that.
Ask questions, you said there will be cards.
Yep,
available?
I have some business cards, and I'm happy to take emails or phone calls or text messages or whatever.
Let's say thanks to Karen for
Sure.
coming in. Corinne.
That's okay. That's okay. Thanks for having me.
It's Corinne, not Karen.
Thank you. Here's some business cards, so I'll leave those with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Grab one. Okay. We will shorten up, not for out of disappointment, but out of trying to keep it to an hour and out of excitement for you all coming and asking all the questions. Much appreciated. Any reports from county office holders? If not, that's okay. There you go. I'll kind of skip over committee reports, but I do want to point out that Susie sent out some emails to those of you who were in committees, and I know it's kind of maybe low on the totem pole, but we're trying to get the committees to do a few things, and I think Susie had some suggestions in those emails as far as what we're looking for from outreach, from social media, from planning and platform. One of the things I wanted to bring up for those on the planning committee is I did receive this about a month after I was supposed to receive it, but that's okay. This is an application to sponsor the county fair, which apparently we do nearly every year, and I didn't know if there was any interest in sponsoring the county fair again at a level of $200, or if there's any discussion about that, or if I would seek a motion for that. To sponsor at the $200 level?
Yeah. Second.
Any discussion? All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And then, bear with me, where's Dale? Who has been in charge of like setting up the booth at the president? I'll be reaching out for some assistance. So I'll talk with the folks at the county fair about getting our booth back, and then we'll also be a sponsor of the county fair again this year. Again, if you have any questions on one of the committees, ask Susie or I, but we encourage you to get together separately and talk about some of those subjects. Yes, sir.
Randy Barr is our liaison to the county, and so if you just talk to him, he will secure the spot for us.
Okay. Martha told me that we would get the same spot, so,
Yeah.
yeah. But I will certainly talk to Randy. A few pieces of, actually, draw for scholarship winner, okay. So we had 4 scholarship applicants. I'm going to read their names real quick. Jesse Pinkley, Gabe Harmon, Clayton Hook, and Henry Wall. We had 2 folks go over those applications and verify they were all, for the most part, in order, and they answered the questions. We have all 4 tickets in here. I'm going to kind of stir them around, and Corinne, I'm going to let you pick the one.
Oh, okay. That's awesome that you guys do that.
It's a $500 scholarship. And thanks again to Wayne for matching that $500. All right, so the winner 0746741.
That would be,
Mr. Gabriel Harmon. So we will reach out, to Bonnie Harmon and get with Gabe so we can get a picture of giving him the check, get that in the paper, and congratulate him appropriately. Look for that in the paper.
David, could we do a brief committee report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we talked about some possible topics.
What committee?
Which is what our committee is.
Outreach.
Yeah. And we talked about possible down the line as far as outreach. And one of the things we talked about was immigration in St. Genevieve County, kind of the historical approach, and also in how that relates to immigration today, and that, that's a big thing in the news always. And we thought the history of immigration plus up-to-date information on immigration would be good too. And we talked about people to contact to do that. And also we talked about veterans issues is another topic, and asking some local veterans organizations and their concerns and things that Democratic people need to know about, the club needs to know about, people who are active in the Democratic Club need to promote their needs and concerns. And also Medicaid expansion and how, Missouri still hasn't done that. And there's so much money that we're just not accepting because we're too stubborn to do that. And we talked about having a program on some personal situations where that would have helped. That's another thing. And also nuts and bolts of local government. Like we had the reports from the people in county government, but if we could take maybe one office and they could tell exactly what they do, because so many people really don't understand, I don't think.
How you're assessed, what your assessment means, I think a lot of people don't know that. And if you own property, you need to know that.
So were you talking about getting speakers to these points?
Yeah, our programs around those things.
Well, the whole theory is if we have topics that are interesting, we hopefully will get more people in, like we did tonight, who are not members. And while their topics will be to enlighten us too,
Sure.
but also to let people know what the Democratic Party is all about. Not that it's a one-issue party or a two-issue party, but we really try to take on those activities that affect everyday life in St. John City and County. And I think some people probably have either no impression of the Democratic Club or perhaps a negative impression. And so that's sort of the aim of this whole thing, is to get out there and show that we just don't sit here and automatically say, oh, it's a Democrat, yep, we're for it, yep, we're for it.
Right.
But we give thoughts to issues.
Right. I like it. All right. Well, look forward if we can put together a program or a speaker around that, because I completely agree.
Should we carry this further among ourselves?
I think
and
so.
come back with some specific topics, or, in addition, and people we have tried to contact or that we plan to contact?
I would, yes,
Okay.
completely agree with that, because the point you made finally there, that's what I'd love to do, is open the doors to more understanding of what the Democratic Party is about, particularly locally. So, yep, thank you. I'm sorry I glazed over those committee reports. Does anybody else have a report? Nope. Okay. Just a few pieces of information. Susie mentioned earlier from the minutes of April, we didn't have a June or July speaker. I do have semi-confirmation from Elad Gross, who we talked about probably back in February or March as a candidate for State Attorney General next year. He would like to come speak, he thinks, on July 17th for the July meeting. So still looking for a June speaker. If anyone has any suggestions, if not, we'll just march forward without a June speaker. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a member of
Missouri Healthcare for All.
Uh-huh.
And the Jefferson County organizer is a gentleman by the name of Dennis McDonald.
Uh-huh.
He would like to come and speak with us on one of our meetings about Missouri Healthcare for All and their push towards getting better healthcare for everybody in Missouri.
Joan, is that similar to what you have?
Can I give you that information?
Yes.
And if we do 2 over the course of 3-4 months, then we do 2 over the course of 3. It's an important topic. So, thank you, Bernice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'd like to join your club.
I would like for you to join our club.
Well, you're gonna have to take out a loan.
Oh, I might.
The annual dues, I believe, I last heard, are $10 a year.
Oh, okay. I think I can handle that.
And Lisa can set you up with that, or anyone else who wants to join. The dues are $10 a year, and we'll even give you probably a year off from paying that if you want to join. But always looking for more members, and greatly appreciate on everyone's attendance. Thank you again. So I talked about ELAD Gross. We received a thank you. If you remember, we gave out the $500 scholarship in-house, and then we also gave $250 to Valley and $250 to St. John for them to hand out according to I believe it was the small business scholarship. Thank you for the contribution of $250 designated for the St. Genevieve County Democratic Club Scholarship Fund. It talks in here about that it's tax deductible, but again, thank you for your generosity. So thanks from Valley, and thank you to Valley. Melvin's not here, so we're going to skip that. Before we do the 50-50, does anyone have anything else they'd like to discuss? Nothing? The materials from Corinne, nailed it that time, are going to be up here and available for you to take. Are you going to stay for a few minutes after?
I can
Okay.
stay and answer
50-50, $36.
Oh, wait a minute, do you have
Come
change?
on.
I don't have change, someone got it.
Does somebody have
Well,
change for 20? I'm not going to give more than 5, but I want in.
I do, I have $16 now.
Oh, you have 16?
I do.
Oh, okay. Then you give me 15 back, okay?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're wanting $5 worth, right, Elaine?
Yes.
Who got it?
I think I got it. You got it right.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Except we might need it because whoever wins probably won't want to give all 20 back, and we might have to make change so they give us 15 back and give them my 5.
So now we're at 41.
You'll get it right.
Okay, thank you. Just double check my math there.
$41. Give you the honor.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
All right. 0746784. Somebody after me. Huh?
And a push ball over the.
Right? Nobody wants to win.
I have 8-7.
So who bought at the end before 6784? Going once?
7, wait a minute. I got it.
Bill's donating back.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
I didn't look at him that carefully.
That's a good idea. We're going to start,
We're gonna start having a little something.
Lisa's going to bring something that we can hand out. Or we'll bring something. Candy of some sort. All right. Next meeting, June 19th. Again, if you have any ideas for speakers between now and then, let me know. And besides that, I would accept a motion to adjourn. Bill?
Second.
Micah? Motion and a second. All in favor? None opposed. Thank you. Have a good night.